purpose of Freethought Forum is to be vigilant to the encroachment of religion into government and to educate the general public as to what a freethinker is.
My thoughts give me power.
No scholar can map them.
No hunter can trap them. No person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei. No person can deny. Die Gedanken sind frei.
Welcome to Freethought Forum. I'm your host, Hugh Henry. Around Easter time, many religions actually celebrate around the same date. So this entire series of programs is going to deal with several different religions. In this case, we're going to deal with Wicca, a fairly new religion. I have as my guest Virginia Stewart-Avalon, elder teaching priestess of the Sibylline order of Wicca, and Laurie Deitrich, master bard and teacher, Sibylline order of Wicca, elder of Lycian Wicca. So, tell us about Wicca.
And the program is how long?
Tell us about Wicca and talk a little about Easter in around 25 minutes.
Okay. The short answer on Wicca is that it is actually a new religion.
Yes.
First came to light in the early 1950s. A British civil servant by the name of Gerald Gardner either created it completely or it was passed down to him by a secretive existing coven, kind of depending on which story you believe.
There is another story.
Yes. The neat thing about the world of Wicca is that there's always another story.
Gardner was a member of a Masonic derivative secret society. He was highly placed in that order that I can't mention because I'm a member of it and I'm not a high enough a degree to talk about it. So, anyway, when the founder of the order, Aleister Crowley, whose name you might recognize, died, yes. Gardner wrote to the Secretary General of the order and demanded to be made the head of the order, and they laughed at him because, well, for one thing, there was beer spilled all over his letter, and half the words were misspelled. So they figured that a drunken spot would not really be a good leader for their organization. And the story goes that in retaliation for his rejection from this organization, that he went out and he founded an organization of his own that he sort of incorporated it and then called it witchcraft. It was not called Wicca for quite some time, and for the rituals, he borrowed freely, and I know that this is true, he borrowed freely from the rituals of this other organization and then incorporated folk tradition and local custom in Britain and also a lot of philosophy from the Far East and the Middle East and India in particular, where he'd spent some time, to create this new religion that he felt religion had completely denigrated and dismissed and relegated the woman's role to, making pies and cakes and doing other menial, servile,
the ladies' auxiliary.
Yes, unimportant things. So one of the things that he did following the footsteps of the Golden Dawn and other secret societies was to raise the position of women and raise the position of female divinities so that the goddess and the god were of equal status. And in fact, in Gardnerian Wicca, the goddess is of greater stature than the god. Yes, she was the prime creatrix. She gave birth to the universe through parthenogenesis, and she created she gave birth to the god through parthenogenesis, and then he grew up and became her partner. And he dies once a year. He's the crops. He's the animals that we harvest, and so it's. He very consciously was tapping into ancient agricultural myths of the dying grain god and so forth. And so for him, the goddess was preeminent, and the god was just sort of this, he's what we eat and he's what we drink, but he's not really...
he's responsible for the beer that got spilled on the
He's
application.
responsible for the beer, and he's responsible for the wine and the steak and the bread, but he doesn't make decisions. That's the goddess's job.
And we have come away from that a little
Yes,
bit.
we have.
The early when Wicca sort of started arriving in America, the goddess aspect was the first thing that caught on, particularly with some of the feminist movements out in California. So we still do have what's called a Dianic strain of Wicca, right, which is women, pretty much women, predominantly women only. But in the last 20 years or so, there's been a real rise of what's become known as eclectic Wicca, which tend to be individuals or groups getting together very consciously, taking what works for their personal belief system, what they feel is benevolent and responsible and useful within their paradigm, and creating their own personal practices. And we've gotten quite far away from, at this point, the need to try to claim centuries-old history, yes, that really can't be substantiated, and more towards balance. The pendulum is swung enough now. We don't have to put the goddess above the god anymore.
Right.
One of the few things I believe that can generally, and this is difficult, be said about those who follow Wiccan, is that they're a dualist god-goddess religion.
Generally.
That's if you allow a lot of slop in the statement generally.
Yeah.
With the exception of the exclusively woman Dianic movements.
As far as belief systems go, if you ask 10 Wiccans, you'll get 50 belief systems.
Yep.
And so, and we're not here really to speak for the community, because they are very good at speaking for themselves.
And we can't.
But no, we can't.
No one person really can.
No one person can really even speak for another. But what we can say is that by and large, divinity, if we discuss divinity at all other than as an archetypal psychological tool that we can use to become better tuned in to ourselves, to others, to the earth, to our environment, I think that a lot of us look at divinity as being immanent in everything. Mm-hmm. So we are all gods and goddesses. The plants are divine. The earth itself, the stones are divine. Everything is divine. So there is no sacred and secular. It's all sacred. And if one has a need for reaching out for a higher power, we very consciously understand that if such a higher power indeed exists, it would be beyond our comprehension. So anything that we could think about, it would be a construct, a piece of software, if you will, that allows us to interface with the hard drive of the universe. And, and we each create our own software. So if I want to call it Aphrodite, then, in our community, everybody goes, okay, well, we sort of understand a little bit about that archetype. Okay, cool, fine, we'll call it Aphrodite. And if we want to call it Pan or, Granite, that's all okay too. So there's a lot of understanding.
I understand there are a large number of techno-pagans, that
yes,
there are a large number of pagans who are from the computer and technical community.
Yes, my husband would be a prime example of a techno-pagan. He is a programmer.
There's another person we probably ought to discuss, Alex Sanders, who's responsible for the Alexandrian branch.
Which is often described as Alexandrian is to Gardnerian as Episcopalian is to Catholic.
Okay.
Except closer.
Yes. It's sort of Gardnerian light, only not even that light.
Yeah, they changed a couple of the names. And that's about it. They kept most of the rituals. They kept the holidays. In fact, most of us kept the holidays. And the holidays were, in ancient people celebrated different festivals, of course, based on what their civilization was built on. And for Celtic peoples living in Northern Europe, the archaeological evidence speaks to a solar calendar that was very focused on winter solstice, sun returning,
Winter and summer, very important.
Winter and summer. I mean, if you're living in a very cold environment, it's very important to know when the days are going to start getting longer, so you can leave the longhouse and get some fresh air.
Could you briefly go through the celebrations, the various ones?
The classical, what has become sort of the classical wheel of the year is 8 roughly evenly spaced holidays. And there's all kinds of controversy about this too, as with everything.
Of course.
There are the
doing our
Celtic
best here.
fire festivals, which are Samhain and Beltane.
Which are?
Samhain is what we normally call Halloween. Beltane is May Day, May 1st. And then there are, what are the other two? Celtic.
Samhain is our New Year, and it's October 31st, and most of our holidays are 2 days. So October 31st, November 1st is Samhain. And then the next one would be winter solstice, which is December 21st and 22nd. The next one is Brignassa, or Bridget's Day, or Imbolc. Several different names for all of these, which is February 2nd. And then spring
Which roughly corresponds,
equinox.
Well, Imbolc roughly corresponds to Groundhog Day.
Yes.
Right.
Although the groundhog symbolism doesn't seem to have made the crossover into neo-paganism.
No, not at all. And then spring equinox, March 21st, 22nd. Beltane, which is May the 1st. Midsummer, June 21st, 22nd. The first harvest festival is Lammas, which is August 1st. And then second harvest festival, autumn equinox, September 21st, 22nd. And then we're back to Beltane, which is the third and final harvest festival, and then we're into winter. So our first day of summer is Beltane. So May 1st is our first day of summer, and that really works in Texas. Anybody who thinks summer in Texas starts in June hasn't been outside lately.
No.
Well, tell us about the one we're about to hit, or actually just hit.
Yeah.
And
the
its
vernal equinox.
association with Christian Easter, which I believe, if nothing else, is by name.
Yeah.
Primarily by name, and some of the symbolism that has been left over.
Well, talk to us.
In fact, most of it. This one is actually, interestingly enough, only in English and in German does the modern name for the festival of Christ's resurrection, is it still derived from the old Germanic festival of Ostara. In, I think, every other European language, the modern name for Easter is derived from the Hebrew for Passover. But Ostara was German goddess of springtime and fertility. The entire month of April appears to have been named after her. And there are a couple of different stories about where the eggs and the bunnies come in. Rabbits may have been sacred to her for some obvious reasons. Rabbits are very
fertile.
Very fertile.
Yeah.
Seen quite a bit in the spring. The March and April is the mating season. Here, of course, not so much, but our ancient ancestors in Germany probably saw the rabbits out dancing and
fighting. They were on their
fighting
hind legs,
and
so
running.
They thought they were dancing.
There's also a story about the goddess herself, Ostara, having found an injured bird on the ground, and to save it, she turned it into a hare. But the transformation was incomplete. Our gods are a bit flawed sometimes. And it took on the appearance of a hare, but still laid eggs like a bird. And then this very grateful hare would decorate these eggs and leave them as presents to the goddess who saved it. So this is really about as much as we know, as modern scholars know about the festival of Ostara.
The ancient holiday, and it appears that the holiday, Ostara or Esther, depending on what country you're in, she was a Saxon goddess, and she had some Norse Germanic characteristics, so she had a following in the Norse countries and in the Celtic countries as well. So people would decorate eggs and hang them in the roof trees of the house or in the windows to banish evil. And the original festival was one of the planting festivals. The planting in most of these countries started with the spring equinox, when all the seeds were blessed and made fertile. And so you went into a frenzy of planting, because if you don't plant in time, your plants don't get water, you don't have a harvest, you all starve to death, that's it. And one of the things they were very concerned about, of course, was blight and crop disease. And also disease that can strike your herds. So, most of the folks raise sheep and cattle and horses. So it was very important to bless them and protect them. And one of the ways they did that was with decorated eggs as the symbol of the goddess, as a symbol of fertility. And the holiday seems to perhaps have started as a spring equinox festival, where you did all your seed blessing and protection from blight and blessing of the newborn ewes and newborn lambs and foals and calves and so forth from the winter, all at the same time. Kind of an early blessing before you plant. And then Beltane is a fertility celebration specifically for the completion of planting. You're done planting. You can go fishing now, but before you do that, because it's the season. Summer is the season of war, which in ancient times wasn't a serious kind of thing that we do the way we think of it now. Our Celtic, if anybody had Celtic ancestors, and this is true for a lot of other tribal countries as well. War was a way to pass the time during the summer and get out from underfoot. So, you weren't going to kill anybody, really. You were probably going to go bride or husband stealing, poach a few cattle, take them home, some horses. You really like the star shape on that horse's, head, so you make off with it. And it was a way to have fun, improve your prowess, and those sorts of things. And it kept you from getting into arguments with your partners and children. So it was an entertaining time of year. And but before you left on your cattle raids or what have you, you needed to ensure the fertility of your crops, and the way that to do that was, in addition to the eggs and bunnies, was perhaps to imitate the rabbits, and you with your chosen partner, you would go, which was not necessarily your spouse, was to go out into the fields and get the plants all excited so they'd grow faster. And interestingly, for those of you who really enjoy science, as I do, somebody got very curious about this practice and wired an EEG up to a number of plants in a laboratory. And, they were just trying to monitor whether plants had feelings, emotions, whether they registered anything. And one day, they got some very unusual readings that the plants were growing faster and they were being very vigorous, or they were excited about something. They didn't know what had happened because nothing was scheduled in that lab. And they checked with everybody, and come to find out a couple of the lab techs were having an affair. They went into that particular laboratory for their assignation. And the plants picked up on it, and they did indeed grow faster. They had sturdier roots, and they put out more leaves. And so our ancestors did have a clue about one or two things.
Monsanto is not going to like this.
No, probably not.
Scientific method.
Scientific method.
Go forth and
Monsanto is
experiment.
not going to like
Put
this.
your plants in your bedroom and write down your findings and publish.
And even if there's no science to get behind it, I mean, really, what can it hurt?
Yeah, it's fun. Because for us, I think for the majority of people in the pagan community, because Wicca is not one unified religion. We are a disorganized and we want it that way, aggregate of hundreds or thousands of different traditions that have agreed to get along. So we include atheists and agnostics and your true believers. We have our fundamentalist pagans, but most of the time they move out into the country and they quit talking to everybody else, so we don't have to really worry about them too much. But tolerance is one of our key words, and we believe that body and spirit are inseparable. That the body is a denser form of spirit, and so to be joyful and to celebrate love and the pleasures of love is part of the sacredness of being alive, and it should be it should be celebrated. It shouldn't be denigrated. It's a healthy thing. Christianity really went off on a wrong track when they, for centuries they engendered centuries of psychosis by claiming that sexuality is a sinful, terrible thing. You shouldn't do it. And we're living with the results of that sort of disassociation psychologically. So we're trying to repair it.
I did some historical research and found out that actually was brought on by the women in Christianity in the first century as a way of getting some sort of control.
Wouldn't be at all surprised.
And that's why they promoted it, so they could be simply not used.
Well, it was that or go into a nunnery, or
Yeah.
die in childbed, or become a nun.
And they picked it up primarily from the Greek women who were who did not have a whole lot of freedoms, and so they did not have. They had a limited amount of choices, but For early Christianity, I mean, if you think that foreplay is evil, of course you're not going to find a woman who's interested in having sex.
Let me go into one other thing. I believe that most Wiccans and pagans and neo-pagans and New Age people, when asked about religion, would say, "Oh, no, that they are on a spiritual path." So they would deny any interest or association with or membership in a religion, and would give some interesting statistics to surveys because the right question wasn't asked.
There tends to be a little bit of a prejudice in our community against the word religion because most of us grew up understanding that religion meant the big three, and really in this country primarily Christianity. It's often hard for us to separate the word religion from a more mainstream religious experience. So we do tend to use the word spirituality more often than we use the word religion. We generally don't talk about worshiping. We talk about celebrating our connection to the divine. We also have an awful lot of members of the pagan and Wiccan communities do consider themselves agnostic. And they will tell you that they talk about the gods and goddesses as archetypes, as symbols, as ways of understanding the natural forces around us, that they don't necessarily know any more than that. And that's enough, that it's still psychologically very validating practice. And so they're very uncomfortable using the word religion. On the other hand, for many pagans who want the right to do things in society, like wear a pentagram, and not be accused of assaulting someone else's beliefs in the workplace, or want the right to take a non-standard holiday off from work without having to explain it to a boss who perhaps is going to be really unsympathetic based on his or her religious beliefs. If we want those kind of rights, we need to talk about what we believe as a religion, because our country does at least pay lip service to the idea of religions having rights. So it's kind of a catch-22 in a way, and a lot of us sort of fall between the cracks, whereas we don't like the baggage that comes with the word religion because we feel that we are very different from most of what that word implies.
I know there's another bunch of baggage that has been associated with Wiccans having to do with Satan and Satanism. And I also know that if you're in a social gathering of Wiccans and you raise your voice just slightly and mention the name Anton LaVey, all conversation will cease suddenly, and everyone in the room will be looking at you.
Who is
He's
that
not very
person?
well liked in our community. Anton LaVey was the founder of the Church of Satan. Wicca and neo-paganism and its derivatives have absolutely no connection whatsoever with Christianity in any of its forms, either with its good God or its bad God. We don't believe in him. We don't pay any attention to them. And LaVey was basically a drama queen who, and that was not meant as a disrespect to anybody, but
To all the drama queens.
to all the drama queens. But they are, he was kind of theatrical, and he was after attention. He really was an attention seeker. And what he basically did is he stole a lot of material from medieval and secret society published writings, changed a few words, and claimed that he had discovered it. And he's one of the most famous plagiarizers in modern times. Essentially, his church isn't. If you look at what they state, it really isn't any more alarming than your local garden club.
Unless, of course, you're a fundamentalist Christian.
Well, they're alarmed by many, many
but
things.
they get freaked out by going to work every day. So I'm not too worried about them. But for normal people, they hear the word Satan and then they go, "Oh, they're worshiping Satan." They're really not.
Yeah, and they're sacrificing dogs and things, and
they're not.
the
And
very
neither
few
are we.
documented cases of anything like that happening have had actually no connection to the Church of Satan.
That's right.
I also know
There's
there's
teenagers who are rebelling.
What happens a lot of times is that when you're raised with a dogmatic religion that tells you that the opposite of your religion is satanic. So you're a teenager and you're kissing on the front porch, or you went out drinking and you come home and your parents say, "You're a child of Satan," and they go, "Okay." And they don't know anything about it except what they've been told in Sunday school. So they do those things, and and then our community gets the bad press. And it's like, I'm sorry, these are children who need psychiatric help and removal from that home, to put into a home where people can think rationally. And we didn't have anything to do with it because we love animals and nature and children and so forth. But we do have some disagreements in philosophy with the Church of Satan and Temple of Set people because they believe that you can do anything you want. I mean, it basically... They removed the harm none from do what thou wilt. It's just do your will, and if somebody gets in your way, too bad. And our read is harm none and do as you will.
I'm going to have to cut you off and thank you because we're just about out of time. And I thank you very much for coming here and talking about Wicca.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you for
having
having
us.
us.
I would have liked to have gone through the focuses of the celebrations, and maybe we can have you back for that. In the meantime, thank you very much. This is Hugh Henry for Freethought Forum, and thank you for tuning in.
I think as I please, and this gives me pleasure.
My conscience decrees, this right I must treasure.
My thoughts will not cater
To duke or dictator, no person can deny. Decadent sin fry, no person